Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a world where dinner isn't guaranteed, and comfort is something you dream about more than you taste. You're not scrolling through food delivery apps, you're walking barefoot through mud, trying to remember the last time your stomach didn't feel hollow. You probably won't survive this, but hey, let's pretend you do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in right now, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little village reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn, the chill already in your bones. The fire has burned down to embers. A faint orange heartbeat inside the hearth. Around you, the one-room cottage smells of damp wool, smoke, and the faint sourness of stored grain. The roof creaks like an old man sighing. You sit up, scratch straw from your hair, and listen to silence first, then the slow shuffle of another family waking nearby. The village is small, a cluster of thatched roofs in a low valley where frost lingers like gossip. This year, the fields didn't give what they promised. Too much rain in spring, too little in summer, and the ground seemed to sigh instead of sing when you pressed a seed into it. The barley came up thin, the wheat spotty. You remember the miller's face as he turned your sack upside down, a puff of dust, a few stubborn kernels, and that muttered line that everyone's been repeating lately. It'll be a lean winter. You're not a noble, not a priest, just one of the millions who lived and died somewhere between the records. Historians still argue whether most peasants truly starved or merely lived perpetually hungry. But you don't need a parchment debate. You can count your ribs like tally marks. The air outside smells of wet earth and wood smoke. Crows hop along the road, clever as accountants, always watching for scraps. Somewhere, a baby cries, the sound both sharp and weary. Hunger changes how a village sounds. It dulls laughter and sharpens every creak of a pantry door. You walk to the communal granary, a low stone-walled building that looks sturdy enough to keep secrets. The reeve, part village manager, part tax collector, waits by the door, tapping a stick on the ground. He's keeping track of who still has grain and who's already come begging. You keep your eyes down as he speaks. The rule is clear. Share what you can, or the Lord's men will take it anyway. A whisper runs through the small crowd. Someone's hidden barley under their floorboards. Someone else was caught grinding beans into flour, pretending it was grain. There's judgment, yes, but mostly envy. When you finally scoop your portion, the weight in your hands feels both precious and pathetic. You know it won't last. A handful per person per day, maybe, if you're careful. You carry it home like treasure, clutching the sack close to your chest, heart thudding. That night, the family gathers around the hearth. The fire pops weakly, fed with brushwood and a few splinters of something that used to be a chair. You watch your mother measure out grain with the same solemnity as a priest dividing communion wafers. She murmurs numbers under her breath, enough for tonight, tomorrow, and perhaps one meal after that. Then she smooths the top flat, presses her thumb into the dust, and ties the sack shut. The sound of that knot tightening feels like the door closing on your future. Outside, wind whispers across the empty fields. Once, they'd have glittered gold with ripening barley. Now, they're a patchwork of stubble and mud, the ghosts of feasts past. You think of how food used to be. Thick bread, ale foaming at the rim, turnips roasted until they almost tasted sweet. Now even the idea of flavor feels decadent. As you lie down on straw that smells faintly of mildew, you hear mice scurry in the rafters. You don't even mind them, they're only doing what you would. There's a shared understanding between starving creatures. Somewhere in the dark, a bell tolls, distant, slow, and hollow. Maybe for vespers, maybe for another soul who didn't make it through the night. The next morning the air is colder still. You notice the smoke from your neighbor's chimney has stopped. No wood left, maybe. Or maybe the family's gone silent, too. You wrap your cloak tighter and walk toward the stream. It's low, sluggish, rimmed with frost. The reflection staring back at you looks like someone else. A face drawn thin, lips cracked, eyes a little too wide. You splash water on your face anyway. Vanity still lingers like an echo of normal life. You head back past the churchyard where the ground looks freshly turned. Famine years always fill graves faster. The priest walks the perimeter, muttering prayers and keeping his own stomach from growling too loudly. There's talk that the monastery nearby might open its doors to the poor, but you've heard those stories before. Sometimes the bread they give is moldy, or the broth thinned, until it's more mercy than meal. Still, hope is a powerful spice. It keeps you walking. A cart rattles down the road, wheels squealing. It's carrying barrels of grain toward the Lord's hall, because of course it is. You watch the sacks jostle, feel the anger rise like a fever, then fade. Anger burns calories, and you can't afford that. That night, the wind changes. It smells of rain, late, useless rain that mocks rather than nourishes. You huddle closer to the fire. Someone hums a tune, thin and trembling. For a moment, you almost drift off. Hunger dulls everything into a soft blur. Even misery becomes background noise. Then a thought slips in, quiet as a thief. Tomorrow you'll start counting. Every grain, every mouthful, every hour until the next harvest, or until there's nothing left to count. You wake before the rooster this time because your stomach refuses to let you sleep longer. The night has been a shallow drift of half dreams, numbers mostly, and the smell of grain dust. Counting has become your new religion. Every morning now, before the frost melts, you sit cross-legged by the hearth and tally what remains. You pinch a few kernels between your fingers, whisper a number, and drop them back into the sack as though you're blessing them. In your world, math isn't an abstract subject. It's survival. Families count days by how many meals can be stretched, how many handfuls of oats remain, how much smoke they can afford to send through the chimney before the next frost. You can't afford waste, not a crumb. Even crumbs have destinies, pressed into cakes, fed to chickens, or soaked into broth. There's a rhythm to it now. Measure, ration, pray. You run your hand along the rim of the clay jar that holds what's left of the barley. It's sealed with wax, tight as a secret. You feel almost guilty at the thought of breaking it open too soon. The old woman next door swore that sealing grain with wax kept it safe from both moisture and rats. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really understood pest control or simply relied on luck and superstition. But you've seen the truth. Rats understand hunger as well as humans. Your mother keeps a small ledger scratched onto birch bark, a simple record of portions, little lines carved in columns, some old, some new. Each line means a meal gone, another day survived. It's the village's silent calendar. No one bothers with saints' days or feast days anymore. Those belong to people who still eat regularly. Now it's just before the next frost, or after the last loaf. At midday, the reeve visits again, making rounds like a grim accountant. His task isn't easy. He must ensure the Lord's stores are secure while pretending to care for the villagers' welfare. He carries a ledger of his own, thick with inked marks. You hate the sound of his quill scratching. It sounds too much like chewing. The rule in your village is simple. 10% of what you harvest belongs to God, another chunk to your Lord, and whatever remains belongs to the rats, unless you're clever. Some bury grain under the floor, wrapped in cloth and sealed in clay jars. Others hide it in hollowed logs, or even inside their own bedding. But the risk of discovery is high. Thieves don't wear masks. They wear familiar faces. Hunger erases loyalty faster than the rain washes tracks. That evening, your family debates when to open the next jar. The discussion feels almost ceremonial. Your father insists on waiting another week. Your mother says you can't stretch what doesn't exist. And you sit quietly, tracing the rim of your wooden bowl with one finger. In the corner, the youngest child gnaws a piece of bark, playfully at first, then with intent. Everyone pretends not to notice. Later, when the fire dies low, you step outside. The night sky glitters with cold stars, and the moon looks too full, mocking, as if the heavens themselves are overfed. You remember hearing that some people in the cities have started eating ground bones, even clay, just to fill their stomachs. Historians still argue whether those tales are exaggerated, but you imagine the texture, gritty, dry, like swallowing the memory of food. In the granary, you see something moving. A rat, of course. You approach quietly and notice it nibbling through a loose plank. You don't have the strength to chase it, so you just watch. In a strange way, you admire its persistence. The rat doesn't think about tomorrow. It only knows hunger now. That's a kind of wisdom. The next day, the villagers gather for what passes as a council. Everyone brings their ledgers, or at least their worries. There's a kind of solidarity in shared misery. You can complain openly because everyone else is starving too. Someone suggests sealing the remaining grain with clay and storing it in the church cellar. God's pantry, they call it. Half joking. The priest hesitates, mutters something about fairness. You can tell he's just as afraid as the rest of you. The smell of burning straw fills the air. Someone's cooking what little remains of their hay to mix with flour. Yes, hay. You'd think humans wouldn't stoop to that, but starvation has a way of redefining edible. A rumor goes around that boiling straw 3 times removes its bitterness, though no one's proven it. Maybe they just hope that saying it makes it true. You go home that night and start an experiment of your own. You measure exactly 1 cup of oats, your treasure, and pour it into a pot with twice as much water. You stir slowly, whispering numbers like a charm. 1 turn for the living, 1 for the lost. The mixture thickens into something halfway between gruel and regret. You spoon it out carefully, dividing it into equal bowls, even scraping the edges so no one feels cheated. When everyone finishes, you scrape your own bowl clean with a fingertip. You can't afford even ghosts of meals. Your father leans back and exhales, a sound like defeat wrapped in relief. Another day, he says. That's become the new blessing. As you lie awake later, you think about counting differently. Not in numbers of meals, but in sensations. The warmth of the fire, the faint sweetness of barley on your tongue, the sound of your sister breathing softly nearby. They're all measures of life, too. You try to fall asleep thinking of abundance, But your body insists on arithmetic. 1 sack left, 4 mouths to feed, 30 days until planting season. Outside frost glints like powdered sugar across the fields. A fox yips in the distance, probably scavenging what humans haven't claimed. The stars seem closer tonight, sharp enough to cut. You wonder if anyone beyond the hills feels this same emptiness. Probably they do. The world's always been full of hungry people. It's just your turn in the cycle. Before you drift off, you whisper your own tally. Quiet, private, and oddly soothing. 3 jars left, 5 loaves of barley bread, 1 winter more, and then you sleep, because counting is the only lullaby you have. When you wake, the air smells of damp moss and wood smoke, signs that the village is stirring again, everyone creeping toward another day of foraging the edges. The fields are mostly done for, stripped of anything edible, so you and your neighbors drift outward like tired bees in search of whatever scraps nature forgot to hide. Hunger makes explorers of everyone. You pull on your rough wool cloak, the one that used to itch but now feels comforting. The morning light catches on the frost that rims the ditch, and every breath hangs visible in the air. There's beauty in the cold if you squint, though beauty doesn't fill your stomach. Your hands are cracked from work and cold, but you clutch a small woven basket anyway, ready for whatever the woods might offer. Out past the hedgerows, you hear the crunch of others moving through leaves, their baskets clattering with roots, bark, and weeds. It's a quiet, solemn kind of harvest. No songs, no laughter, just the sound of sticks breaking and the occasional hopeful murmur when someone finds a patch of something green. You crouch near a thicket and recognize the jagged edges of nettles. They sting, but boiled, they're edible, bitter, iron-rich, and blessedly alive. You tug them carefully, remembering to leave some behind. Even now, you respect the old rule. Never take all, or the land takes back later. A little farther on, you spot acorns scattered beneath a massive oak. They're hard, unwelcoming things, more suited for pigs, but you know better now. Soaking them in water leaches out the tannins. Roast them, grind them, and you can trick yourself into thinking it's flour. Historians still argue whether peasants really used acorn meal often or only during the worst years. You're living proof that desperate recipes don't wait for academic consensus. You collect until your fingers ache. A child nearby hums a tune, something bright, absurdly cheerful, and you almost smile. There's something about children that refuses to learn despair properly. They make games out of gathering thistles, pretending it's treasure. You envy that. As the sun climbs, you move toward the marshy patch by the stream. The smell hits first, earthy, wet, alive. You find cattails standing like brown candles in the shallows. Their roots are thick and fibrous, but if you roast them long enough, they soften and taste faintly of potato. You pull a few free, mud splattering up your legs, and laugh softly at the absurdity of it. Dinner from the swamp. Farther down, you see an older man on his knees by the water, scraping moss from rocks. "It's edible," he mutters, without looking up. "So they say." You don't ask who they are. Everyone has become a scholar of survival lately. The man's hands are trembling, but his determination isn't. You nod, share a glance that says, "We're both still here," and move on. In the hedgerow, you find blackberries, small, shriveled, but still sweet enough to make you sigh. You crush one between your fingers and lick the juice. It's barely enough to taste, but it reminds you of summer, the taste of before. There's a certain rhythm to this scavenging life. You learn to read the land like a book, the places where roots hide, where rabbits burrow, where mushrooms gather in quiet colonies. You remember your grandmother's warning. Some mushrooms are kind, some are killers. You trust your nose, your memory, and a bit of luck. By afternoon, your basket looks pitiful but promising. Nettles, acorns, cattail roots, a handful of berries, and a scrap of lichen you'll probably regret. But still, you've gathered something. You head home as the light fades, the sky painted in watery gold. Back in the village, smoke curls lazily from a few chimneys. You pass a neighbor who's boiling what looks like bark. She waves with a weary smile. Elm, she says proudly, softens if you boil it 3 times. You nod, impressed, or at least pretending to be. Everyone's a culinary innovator now. Your own hearth greets you with warmth and the smell of boiled nettles. It's sharp, grassy, and not entirely unpleasant. You add your finds to the pot, stirring slowly with a wooden spoon. The broth turns murky green, bits of leaf swirling like tiny ghosts. Someone jokes that it looks like something a witch would drink. You reply, "If it fills my stomach, I'll grow a wart or 2 gladly." That earns the softest ripple of laughter, the kind that dies quickly but still feels good while it lasts. After dinner, you sit by the fire, picking acorns apart with a small knife. Your sister hums quietly, her voice thin but steady. The flicker of the flames turns her face golden for a moment, like a saint from a church fresco. You wonder how many saints ever went hungry. Later, when the pot is empty and the ashes are cooling, you step outside again. The moon's up, silver and smug. You think about the forests, how they become your pantry, your apothecary, your confessional. Every root and berry feels like a secret between you and the earth. You understand now why old songs talk about spirits in trees and rivers that grant mercy. When you're starving, belief grows wherever food does. A stray dog pads up beside you, ribs showing through its fur. You toss it a crumb, barely anything, but it wags its tail anyway. The 2 of you sit there, silent companions bound by appetite. You think of the marsh man, the singing child, the woman with her elm bark, a village of foragers, all pretending the world hasn't shrunk to a meal-to-meal existence. Yet, somehow, that pretense keeps everyone moving. Hope, like the nettles, stings a little, but keeps you alive. You close your eyes, breathing in the cold. Tomorrow, you'll try the woods to the north. Someone said mushrooms grow near the birches there. You know it might be a lie, but you'll go anyway. Lies and hope taste almost the same. You stand over the kettle like a stage magician with very few props, coaxing dinner out of steam, patience, and ingredients that barely qualify as ingredients. The village word for this is simple, pottage, anything soft enough to surrender to the spoon. You've learned the choreography, a thin swirl of grain first, then a careful rain of peas, a sigh of water, a hopeful handful of chopped nettles from yesterday's forage, and whatever odds and ends the day surrendered. If bread is the dream, pottage is the reality, mercifully warm and determinedly beige. You start with the barley you've been hoarding, but only a whisper of it, because a whisper can become a sentence once you thicken it. You grind dried peas in the quern until they turn into a sandy meal that smells faintly green, and you dust that into the pot too. It clouds the water instantly. You stir with your wooden spoon, your baton, your wand, counting slow circles the way you've counted everything lately. The fire catches and cradles the pot, and the kitchen fills with quiet sounds, a bubble, a soft scrape, a low simmer like breathing. Someone once told you, peas are poor people's meat, and it's not wrong. In many places, peas and beans carry the protein that keeps bones from feeling like brittle twigs. That's your mainstream fact for tonight, tucked in as sensibly as a carrot would be if you had one. You add a pinch of salt saved from better weeks and glance at the jar of bran sitting like an unenthusiastic guest on the shelf. Bran stretches flour the way a story stretches an afternoon. It's not glamorous, but it makes the time and the bread go further. Bread is a ritual as much as a recipe. On good weeks, the village bakes at the communal oven, timing loaves by gossip and bells. Today, though, there's not enough flour to justify a trip, so you improvise. You've scavenged chestnut flour from a trader who swore it came from across the mountains where forests wear the hills like capes. Chestnut bread is sweetly earthy and almost cake-like when times are kind. Now it's just a grace note in a chord of hunger. You sift a little into a bowl with bran and the last shy scoop of barley flour, then stir in water until it becomes a sticky, obedient dough. You pat it thin and set it on a hot stone by the fire. Flatbreads, your new best friends, because they don't demand yeast, patience, or a dowry. The surface blisters, then browns, and the smell is so comforting you almost cry. Bread doesn't judge. Bread just shows up and tries. You flip the disc with 2 fingers and try not to stare at it like a sunrise. Back in the kettle, the pottage tightens into a mild, friendly sludge. You borrow a trick from your neighbor. She swears a pinch of ash from clean wood adds minerals. You smile because that's what people say when they're about to do something slightly questionable. Still, the ash does deepen the flavor by a hair, a faint charcoal whisper that feels almost fancy. You crumble in the nettles, remembering to roll them between your palms first to tame their temper, and they melt into ribbons as green as a promise. Tonight's wild card is the acorn meal you leached and roasted. It smells nutty and a little smug, like it knows it used to be pig food and has now ascended to cuisine. You whisk it into the pot, and the pottage nods its approval, thickening to the texture of acceptance. You keep stirring, not just for even cooking, but because the motion soothes. The way petting a sleeping cat would if anyone in town could spare a saucer of milk. You pull the flatbread from the stone and stack a few more, thin as patience and freckled with heat. Beside them, you mash a clove of wild garlic with a thumb of salt and a smear of goat whey you bartered for this afternoon. The whey adds tang, the garlic adds confidence. Spread it thin across a warm disk, fold, breathe in. Suddenly, dinner feels like an argument you might actually win. A child wanders in, eyes wide at the sight of stacked bread. You hand over a piece the size of hope and say, "Careful, it bites," because a joke, however small, makes the room larger. The child giggles and pretends to nibble the bread back. That's one. 2 more jokes to go. You ladle the pottage into bowls. It's a soft, pale green with freckles of darker leaf, and the steam carries a garden's memory. Quietly, you scatter in a few dried herbs, marjoram maybe, or what you were told was marjoram by a peddler who might have been selling lawn clippings. Historians still argue whether famine cookery was wildly inventive or grimly monotonous. You suspect it's both at once, depending on who had a grandmother with good ideas and a field with forgiving weeds. As you eat, someone mentions bark bread, how up north people shaved the inner bark of pine, dried it, and ground it into flour when things were truly desperate. You nod. The quirky tidbit lands with that mix of horror and admiration you save for other people's solutions. Historians still argue whether bark bread was common fare or a last-ditch myth that grew taller in the telling. But you can imagine its flavor, forest, and stubbornness. If it comes to that, you'll learn to like trees. You've eaten worse. Remember the elm bark across the lane? It's practically a cousin to this conversation. Between spoonfuls, you plan tomorrow's variations. Maybe a handful of beans from the bottom of the sack. Maybe a splash more whey. Maybe a sliver of bacon fat if rumor and luck collide. You think about thickening with ground cattail root, the swamp-gathered potato you dragged home with muddy ankles. Why not? Your kitchen is a laboratory where the only explosions are applause when a batch actually tastes like something. Bread stretches a meal across the table. Pottage stretches it across the night. You break the flatbread into soft, obedient quarters and sink one into the bowl. The surface ripples, takes the bread in, and returns it tender and heavy with broth. You chew slowly, feeling the starch blanket your hollow places. Your jaw moves lazily, like it's rocking you to sleep from the inside. A second joke arrives by accident. You tell the family the pottage is so thick you could thatch the roof with it. Someone snorts and says, "At least the rain would smell delicious." There's one more laugh left in you, the indulgent idea of writing a cookbook, 1,000 Shades of Beige. Chapter 1. Nettles, but make it dinner. You're not wrong, you're just hungry. The night grows gentle around the hearth. The rat from the granary sneaks into your thoughts like a guest reviewer, and you can almost hear it rating your recipe. 5 stars. Would nibble again. You tuck that away for the next leaner evening because humor is another way to stretch a meal. Calories for the mind. You clean the pot with a scrap of bread, a technique so efficient you'd call it zero waste. If you had a pamphlet and a smug tone, the ashes dim, the house breathes. Someone hums that same thin tune the child sang in the hedgerows, and it threads through the rafters like smoke. Before sleep, you pinch a tiny lump from tomorrow's dough and set it aside near the warm hearthstone, encouraging a friendly ferment. You don't have a name for sourdough, but you have the instinct, a living leaven that remembers you and rises for you when the world doesn't. That's hope with bubbles. It's also a fact. Across much of Europe, people let dough quietly sour and use that tangy memory to lift the next loaf. You lie down still tasting chestnut, ash, nettle, and the ghost of garlic. The kettle sighs one last time as it settles. In the darkness, you compose a list, not numbers now, but comforts, warm bowl in hand, steam on your face, the sleepy weight in your stomach, the murmur of your family, and that tiny lump of future dough breathing gently by the fire. The night can be as long as it wants. You've learned how to stretch it, too. You wake to the sound of dripping, melting frost sliding down the thatch into tin pails outside the door. The first thing you think of is water, which would seem like a blessing if it weren't such a dangerous gamble. It's odd how something that falls freely from the sky can still feel like an enemy. When your belly's half empty and your body weaker by the day, even clean-looking water can undo you faster than hunger. So you take it carefully. A shallow sip at dawn, boiled if you've enough fuel, and always filtered through linen. The fabric's patched and stained. But it's your best defense against what you can't see, the sickness that rides the water, waiting for a throat to swallow it down. You look toward the jug of ale sitting by the hearth. It's not the kind of ale that cheers or numbs. It's small ale, the thin cousin of beer, brewed weak enough that even children drink it. It's what keeps you alive. The mild fermentation kills the worst of the water's mischief and gives a whisper of barley flavor, a trace of something civilized. Historians will later call it the medieval world's most reliable hydration strategy, but you just call it breakfast. You pour a cup, cloudy and slightly sour. The taste is somewhere between bread crust and forgotten fruit, but it's liquid, it's safe, and it fills the silence. Beside you, someone's warming a pot of whey, the byproduct of cheese making. It's the drink of those who own more goats than grain, a strange mix of sour and sweet. You'd mocked it once. Now you sip it reverently. At midday, you go to fetch water from the village well. The bucket squeals on the rope as it sinks. You watch the ripples and wonder what secrets hide beneath the surface. Rumors spread that last year's fever began here, carried by something invisible. You've seen too many funerals to laugh that off. Still, thirst wins every argument. When the bucket returns, glistening and heavy, you fill a clay jug, careful not to stir the bottom sediment. The old woman next door swears that if you whisper a prayer while pouring, it blesses the water. Others insist that dropping a heated iron nail into it scares away the bad humors. Historians still argue whether such folk remedies helped at all. But you know faith itself is a kind of medicine. You carry the jug home like a relic. A small splash goes into the kettle for pottage, the rest saved for drinking or thin broth. Nothing is wasted. Even the steam curling from your pot feels precious. You catch it on your face, pretending it's a feast. By evening, the alewife, one of the few village women who brews for trade, visits. Her hands smell of malt and smoke, her apron always dusted with ground grain. She carries a wooden keg under one arm, and the scent of it fills your hut with the faint memory of taverns and laughter. You trade her a bundle of dried herbs and a promise to help mend her fence next week. That's the new currency. Labor, favors, whatever isn't money. She pours you a small cup. The ale is darker than your usual, almost indulgent. Bit stronger than last batch, she murmurs with a wink. You taste it carefully. It's bitter, alive, humming faintly on your tongue. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine being full. You picture festivals past when barrels rolled down the lane and everyone sang themselves into forgetfulness. You even chuckle. There's joke number one for the night. If this ale were any thinner, I could use it to wash my feet. The alewife snorts. Try it. They might taste better. Laughter, brittle but real, warms the air like a second hearth. After she leaves, the family gathers around to make the evening's drink, a thin herb infusion. You drop dried mint into boiling water. Watch it swirl like green smoke. The smell reminds you of summer markets, of medicine, of better days. Some families steep wild chamomile or thyme. Others stir in vinegar to stretch the flavor. Each sip is a tiny rebellion against blandness. You think of distant travelers who claim to have tasted wine. Real grape wine, deep red and dizzying. You've only ever seen it in church, and even then, the priest guards the cup like a dragon. You wonder what it would feel like to be allowed to drink something purely for pleasure. The thought feels luxurious, almost sinful. Later that night, the rain starts again, gentle at first. You set a bowl beneath the eaves to catch it. The water lands with soft plinks, rhythmic as breathing. You think of those who live closer to rivers, how floods can drown their crops, yet fill their barrels. Life's cruel symmetry. Too little kills you slowly, too much kills you quickly. You dip your finger into the collected rain. Taste it. It's clean tonight. Bright as air. You whisper thanks to no one in particular. Sometimes gratitude is just good manners toward luck. Before sleep, you sit with your cup of ale, cradling it like a candle. The liquid glows amber in the firelight. You take small sips, spacing them between slow breaths. It's not enough to feel full, but it's enough to remind you you're alive. Somewhere, someone coughs, a rough, hollow sound. You hope it's not the fever returning. You remember how last winter it swept through the cottages, taking the weakest first. They said the water was to blame, or the air, or the sin of wasting food. Everyone needed a culprit. No one needed proof. You blow out the candle and lie down, your throat still tasting faintly of barley and mint. The darkness hums softly, the wind outside, the gentle slosh in the jug beside you. The world may be starving, but tonight you've got warmth, a little ale, and the fragile comfort of a full cup. That's enough. Your final joke drifts out before sleep takes you. You whisper to the jug, "Don't turn sour overnight. I can't handle another betrayal." The jug doesn't answer, which is probably for the best. You wake to the low bleating of goats, that familiar sound somewhere between a complaint and a prayer. Livestock are the village's pulse, the small, stubborn pieces of wealth that move and breathe. They're your living banks, creatures that can walk, graze, and multiply your fortune one bleat at a time. The poorest peasants dream not of gold, but of goats, hens, and a single cow with a kind disposition. This morning, you trudge out to the lean-to where your family's goat, a narrow, cranky creature named Mag, eyes you with suspicion. You greet her with a half-smile. "Good morning, Treasury." The joke falls flat. She's chewing a rope like it owes her money, but you say it anyway because humor keeps the chill from biting too hard. You crouch down and begin to milk. The rhythm is steady, soothing, squeeze, release, the stream hitting the pail with a soft hiss. The smell is warm, animal, reassuring. You hum a tune under your breath, something wordless your mother used to sing when the fields were kinder. The milk foams pale and quick, the day's first small victory. Livestock are precious now. You don't slaughter unless you must, because each beast is both food and investment. A goat gives milk, a hen gives eggs, a cow gives both, and, if you're desperate, hides for clothing. Killing one is like breaking open your savings account. You might get a feast tonight, but you lose interest forever. You remember hearing that in some villages, people mark their animals with carved wooden charms or bits of cloth to keep the bad hunger spirits away. Historians still argue whether such charms were meant for superstition or community signaling, something to show others this one's off limits. You've seen enough desperate faces to believe both explanations can be true. You walk the field fence line, counting heads. 2 goats, 6 chickens, 1 tired donkey that looks perpetually surprised. The pigs are gone. They were bartered for grain last month, a painful trade but necessary. You remember the day they left, squealing indignantly, as if they knew they were more valuable alive than as meat. In better years, you'd hear the rhythmic sound of the Lord's herds passing on the road, hundreds of hooves and bells. Now, silence. Even the wealthy guard their animals behind tall fences. Famine turns everyone into a gatekeeper. You fill a small jug with Mag's milk and bring it inside. The others wait, bowls in hand. The milk is thin this season. She's as underfed as you are, but it's warm, and when you pour it over stale bread, it becomes breakfast. The texture softens into something halfway between porridge and memory. Someone jokes that it's the first luxury meal since the feast of St. Martin. You grin, mouth half full, and mutter, "We'll call it Mag's Miracle." The laughter that follows is short but genuine. By midday, you're in the yard again, collecting eggs from under the hen straw. 3 today, a bounty. You hold one up to the light, admiring its fragile perfection. An egg is a promise disguised as breakfast, protein now or potential chicken later. You debate which is wiser. Hunger makes philosophers of peasants. You recall a story told by travelers. In some villages during the Great Famine, people preserved eggs by coating them in ash or storing them in brine so they'd last through winter. Historians still argue whether that technique was common knowledge or a clever outlier, but it sounds plausible. You try the ash trick yourself, coating one egg and hiding it in a jar. Experimentation feels daring these days. Afternoon brings barterers through the village, men leading skinny cattle and women carrying baskets of cheese and hides. Trade is cautious but alive. You exchange a patch of linen for a sliver of salted pork fat, the kind that tastes like memory and smoke. It will flavor a dozen pots of pottage if you ration it right. You watch as others swap milk for grain or labor for a chance at a kid goat. Money is too abstract now. Everyone prefers goods that can be eaten, worn, or burned. You hear stories at the well. A nearby manor slaughtered half its cattle because they couldn't feed them. The meat was salted and stored, but by spring it had spoiled. "Better hungry cows than rotting beef," someone mutters darkly. You shake your head. Even waste smells cruel when you've learned the taste of boiled nettles. That evening, the village gathers by the common green, where a cow has calved unexpectedly early. You watch the calf wobble to its feet, slick with birth and miracle. For a moment, everyone forgets their stomachs. There's laughter, clapping, even a song. The air hums with cautious joy. "Good omen," someone says, "means grass will grow soon." You all pretend to believe it. As night falls, you help your father patch the goat pen. He grumbles about thieves, though you both know most thefts now are acts of hunger, not greed. You reinforce the gate with an extra board anyway. You've heard that desperate people steal livestock to eat, or worse, to boil the bones for broth and claim it's medicine. When the chores are done, you sit by the fire and carve a small wooden amulet, a rough goat shape, to hang by Mag's stall. You tell yourself it's just decoration, but when you tie it up, you whisper, "Keep her safe." Faith sneaks out in small gestures, even when you pretend you've grown too tired for superstition. You pour the last of the day's milk into a small cup and sip it slowly. It's warm, slightly sweet, and leaves a faint film on your lips. It tastes like persistence. You lean back, closing your eyes, and imagine the rhythmic sounds of a prosperous barn. The steady chewing, the gentle shifting of hay, the soft rustle of creatures fed and content. You don't hear it now, but memory can be generous when the world isn't. Before sleep, you run through the inventory in your head like a lullaby. 2 goats, 6 hens, 1 donkey, 1 egg in ash, 1 jar of milk, 1 sliver of pork fat, 1 wooden charm. It's not wealth by any lord's measure, but it's life measured your way, slow, breathing, and stubborn. You smile faintly, whispering to the ceiling, "If the cows are the Lord's gold, we're the copper that keeps the world running." The rafters don't disagree. You drift off to the faint rhythm of Mag's distant bleating, a soft, living reminder that hope sometimes has horns and a bad attitude. The next morning, the bells from the manor ring too early. one of those sharp, self-important sounds that make you flinch before you're even awake. It's collection day. That phrase has its own weight in a peasant's chest, somewhere between dread and resignation. Today, you'll pay your dues, tithes to God, taxes to the Lord, and what's left to your family's stomachs. The hierarchy of hunger has never been clearer. You pull on your cloak and step outside, watching the fog lift off the fields like thin smoke. In the distance, you see other villagers trudging the same direction, each carrying a small sack or bundle, grain, eggs, or anything that can count as payment. The air smells faintly of damp hay and sour sweat. A few dogs trail behind, hopeful but out of luck. At the church gate, the priest stands beside a wooden chest, his thin face framed by the kind of piety that comes with a full belly. You drop your tithe, just a scoop of grain, the smallest you can offer without looking defiant. His fingers brush the sack and he nods with practiced solemnity. "The Lord provides," he says. You bite back the reply on your tongue. "The Lord might, but I'm doing all the heavy lifting." You smile instead. That's the safer sin. Inside the church, candles flicker, their light trembling against the chill. You kneel briefly, not from devotion, but habit. The air smells of wax and damp stone, and somewhere above, the painted saints look down, gaunt and eternal. You wonder if they ever knew hunger. Historians still argue whether medieval faith was driven more by fear or by hope. But right now, it's simply the routine that keeps you upright. You whisper a small prayer, not for salvation, but for rain that comes kindly, for grain that doesn't rot. Outside, the reeve waits with his ledger, ready to collect for the Lord's stores. His quill scratches like an insect in your ear. "Your family's share," he says, not unkindly. He writes down what you owe, what you've given, and what you've failed to produce. You hand over a small pouch of barley and a promise to deliver more after the thaw. He doesn't believe you, but he marks it anyway. Promises are the village's second currency. Behind you, a woman pleads that she has nothing left. Her husband's been sick, her goat's barren. The reeve looks pained, then gestures toward the granary. "You can apply for relief," he says, the phrase sounding bureaucratic, even in mud and straw. Relief means borrowing from the Lord's stores. Grain you'll repay twice over when times improve. If they improve. You follow the woman to the granary, watching as she kneels to sign the crude tally board with a mark. A sack of barley is handed to her, heavier with shame than grain. You feel it too. The system is efficient, almost elegant in its cruelty, charity that doubles as debt. Back at home, your mother sorts through what remains after the tithes. The pile looks smaller, but lighter somehow. Obligation weighs more than hunger. You grind the grain for supper, the sound of the quern echoing through the hut. It's rhythmic, endless, the heartbeat of survival. By noon, a messenger from the manor arrives on horseback, his cloak embroidered with your lord's crest. He brings news. The stores are nearly empty even up there. The harvest failed across 3 shires, he announces, loud enough for everyone to hear. His lordship is reducing rents this season, but all must contribute to communal aid. You can almost admire the spin. Mercy dressed up as tax relief. After he leaves, people gather to talk. Some are grateful, others mutter that the Lord's granaries are full of hidden sacks. You've heard both versions of this story every famine year. Historians still argue whether landlords hoarded or shared in times of crisis, but down here, what matters is perception. Fairness doesn't fill bellies, but it can keep torches unlit. You decide to visit the reeve again before sunset. He sits by his small fire, ledger open, a cup of ale by his side. "You're a sensible one," he says, "always on time." You shrug. "Hard to be late when you've nothing left to bring." He chuckles, a low, tired sound. You risk asking if there'll be another dole from the manor soon. He hesitates, then nods. "Maybe next week. Depends on what the abbot can spare." That's another layer to the hierarchy. The church feeds the Lord feeds the reeve feeds whoever's still standing by then. When you leave, dusk has turned the air soft and gray. You pass the poorhouse, where a few families have gathered by the doorway, bowls in hand. A monk ladles out thin broth. It smells of onions and faint mercy. You join the line, trading a small prayer for a half cup of warmth. The broth is almost water, but it slides down sweet. You thank the monk, who smiles wearily. "Remember," he says, "the Lord tests the humble." You nod. He's been very thorough this year. That earns a quick, scandalized laugh from the man behind you. Your second joke of the night. Back home, you tell your family about the reduced rents and the possible dole. Hope flickers briefly, like the fire before it dies. You eat your broth in silence, savoring the faint taste of onion as though it's a luxury spice. Later, you sit outside, the stars sharp and cold. You think about the balance of things, the endless seesaw of giving and owing. The church takes, but blesses. The Lord takes, but protects. The reeve takes, but smiles. Everyone's role is justified by the promise that someone above them is hungrier for righteousness. You find yourself wondering what true relief would feel like. Not charity wrapped in conditions, not faith paid for by obedience, just the quiet fullness of enough. Maybe that's what heaven really means to a peasant, a world where no one's ledger ever opens again. Before bed, you run your fingers over the small cross carved into the wooden doorframe. It's there for protection, or perhaps to mark your house for the next distribution of grain. It's hard to tell anymore. Either way, you trace it like a signature, sealing another day survived. You crawl under your blanket of patched wool, listening to the faint hum of the wind. Somewhere far off, the manor bells toll again, a final reminder of order before darkness takes over. You whisper to yourself, "We pay, we pray, we stay." It's not rebellion, not surrender, just the rhythm of endurance. The next morning smells faintly of wet straw and ambition. Market day. You tie your cloak tighter and join the slow-moving line of villagers heading toward the crossroads, where the weekly fair unfolds. It's not festive anymore. Famine has drained the color from the stalls and the laughter from the air. But still, people gather, because trade, like hunger, never stops. The road is slick from last night's rain, churned to mud by hooves and cartwheels. You pass others carrying baskets, bundles, or nothing at all but hope. The church bells toll faintly behind you, the sound fading as the open field comes into view. There it is, the market square, half empty, yet buzzing with quiet desperation. Canvas canopies flap in the breeze, their colors faded to the same weary brown as everything else. The smell is a mix of wet wool, onions, animal dung, and bread that's gone slightly sour. You weave through the crowd, eyes darting between stalls. A woman offers wilted cabbages at a price that would have bought a goose 2 years ago. A man sells candles so thin you could read through them. A child hawks rabbit skins, still damp, his small voice breaking as he shouts, "Prices no one will pay." You head to the grain merchants first. Their stalls are barricaded with sacks piled high, guarded like treasure. You approach one offering your small pouch of coins, the savings from months of mending and trading. The merchant squints, tilts his head, and pours a measure of barley into your hand. "That's the price now," he says. You blink. "For this handful?" He shrugs. "If you want more, bring silver." You feel the weight of your disappointment, heavier than the coin purse itself. Behind you, a man mutters about hoarders and blood merchants. Another spits on the ground. Historians still argue whether price gouging was deliberate cruelty or just desperate economics. Standing here, you don't need a lecture. You just know hunger makes everyone's morals negotiable. You wander toward the barter stalls. Here, at least, the trade feels human. A shoemaker offers to patch your boots in exchange for milk. A widow wants to swap a clay jug for half a loaf. You trade her one of your wooden spoons and a handful of nettle seeds. "They'll grow again," you say. She smiles faintly, eyes glinting with that particular mix of sadness and gratitude you've come to recognize. It's what survival looks like when politeness is the only currency left. You linger near the ale tent, not for drink, but for warmth. The brewer, a heavy-set man with soot-stained fingers, nods as you approach. "Small ale today," he says. "No credit." You nod and offer a slip of cloth from your sleeve, a patch of wool with a neat mend. He studies it, shrugs, and pours you a half cup. The ale is flat, thin, but blessedly wet. You sip it slowly, savoring each swallow like you're storing it for later. In the corner of the square, a small group argues loudly near the waystone. "The grain prices have doubled overnight," someone says. Word spreads like fire. People whisper, then shout. The merchant swears it's because the miller raised his fees. The miller blames the reeve. The reeve blames God's weather. The crowd swells, tension rising like steam from hot porridge. You back away, clutching your barley close. A friar steps forward, holding up his hands. "Peace," he calls out. "Peace." "Neighbors, remember, we are all tested together," someone yells. "You don't look tested, Father." Laughter ripples, brittle as dry straw. You smile despite yourself. There's your first joke of the day, accidental but welcome. The friar forces a smile and continues preaching about charity, though no one's really listening. The market smells of fear now, sharp and metallic, as if the very air's gone hungry. You slip away from the noise toward the far end of the square, where traders from other villages sell odds and ends. Dried herbs, threadbare cloaks, bits of metal salvaged from broken tools. One man lays out strange powders. He calls them foreign spices, though they look suspiciously like crushed bark. He swears a pinch can turn broth into feast. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had access to exotic trade goods during famine years. But you don't care about trade routes or economics. You care about the promise of taste. You buy a tiny paper twist of the powder, more for hope than flavor. As you head home, the sun struggles through the gray sky, casting pale light over the road. You pass carts creaking under the weight of grain sacks, lordly shipments bound for manors, not markets. You glance at them with envy and resignation. The world has always been unequal. Famine just sharpens the contrast until it cuts. On the way back, you stop by a small roadside fire where two travelers warm their hands. They're thin, ragged, and smiling in that strangely cheerful way of people who've seen worse. You share a bit of ale with them, and in return, they tell stories. One claims that in the South, some farmers are turning sawdust into bread, mixing it with rye to trick the stomach. You shudder, half in horror, half in curiosity. The traveler grins. Historians will argue about that one day, he says. Was it clever or mad? Hard to tell. You laugh, your second joke moment. Probably both. Most survival schemes are. You walk the last stretch home in quiet reflection, the sound of the fair fading behind you. Your boots squelch in the mud, each step a small rebellion against giving up. The barley in your pouch rattles softly, a whisper of security. Back at the cottage, your family listens as you describe the market, how the prices climb like ivy, how the traders look more hollow than their goods, how even laughter feels rationed. You pour the barley into a jar, and it clinks against the clay like coins. For a moment, the sound feels rich. That night, as you sit by the hearth, you sprinkle a pinch of your so-called spice into the pot. The scent rises, foreign and faintly woody. It doesn't change the taste much, but the smell. The smell pretends to be abundance. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, letting imagination season your hunger. As everyone eats, you tell them about the travelers, about sawdust bread and riot rumors, about the friar's trembling hands. They laugh where they can, sigh where they must. When the pot is scraped clean, you look around the dim room and realize something. Famine doesn't just take food, it rearranges the meaning of enough. You lie down, the fire a small orange eye blinking low. Tomorrow, there'll be another market, another barter, another rumor. But tonight, the spice still lingers in the air, smelling faintly of faraway lands and foolish hope. You whisper, half joking, "Next week I'm selling imaginary sugar." No one laughs, but you do, softly, into the smoke. By the next morning, the market smell of smoke and stale bread has drifted from your clothes, replaced by the scent of damp soil and early frost. It's harvest's ghost season, nothing left to reap, just to glean. The fields are bare now, but for the careful and the desperate, they still whisper opportunity. You step outside, basket in hand, your breath puffing white against the gray dawn. The others are already out there, thin silhouettes moving slowly through the stubble. Gleaners. It's almost a sacred word in a hungry ear. You're not harvesting, you're gathering mercy, whatever kernels, pods, or scraps the sickle missed. According to law and custom, the poor have the right to glean after the Lord's reapers finish. Historians still argue whether that generosity came from Christian compassion or from the simple practicality of keeping the desperate from stealing. You don't bother arguing. You're just grateful for the rule. You walk the field rows carefully, bending to pick up stray ears of barley. The stalks are brittle, snapping like dry bones between your fingers. Every few minutes, someone straightens up, stretches a stiff back, and sighs. No one speaks much. Conversation wastes breath that might otherwise keep you warm. A thin sun finally pushes through the clouds, painting the field in silver light. You spot a patch where the soil seems darker, where the reapers might have missed a few bunches. You hurry, crouch, and start gathering, the rustle of straw crisp and satisfying. Your fingertips numb from the cold, but the sound keeps you going. It's the music of hunger being postponed. Down the row, a group of women are working together, sharing a woven basket. One hums softly, a tune older than anyone alive, and soon the others join in, their voices soft and steady. The song is half lullaby, half endurance chant. You recognize it from childhood, back when famine was just a word your elders muttered when they thought you weren't listening. You hum along. There's something about rhythm that steadies the spirit when food cannot. By midday, you've collected a modest handful of barley and a few peas. Not enough to fill the pot, but enough to justify hope. You pause to eat a crust of bread from your pocket, softened with a splash of ale. The wind whistles through the hedgerows, tugging your cloak. Somewhere nearby, a child cries, and a mother hushes him with the soft patience of someone who has nothing else to give. The Lord's steward rides by on horseback, inspecting the fields. His cloak looks too fine for this mud, but his eyes are tired. He nods curtly to the gleaners, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of fear of appearing heartless. The law allows gleaning, yes, but only within limits. No gathering after sundown, no cutting standing stalks, no trespassing into the manor's private strips. You've learned those rules by heart. You follow them like commandments because punishment can be swift. You've seen a boy whipped for pocketing a handful of green wheat before it ripened. Mercy has boundaries here. By late afternoon, you turn toward home, the basket light, but not empty. Along the way, you pass the communal bakehouse. Smoke rises from its chimney, thick, sweet, full of promise. Inside, the warmth hits like a blessing. Families wait their turn to bake their shared loaves. The heat of the oven, a rare luxury. You trade a few grains from your gleaning pile for a slot near the edge of the hearth. Your dough is simple, flour stretched thin with ground peas, and a trickle of whey. The smell as it bakes, though, is divine. The communal oven is where the village remembers how to talk again. People gossip softly. Who's fallen ill? Which family's been granted extra grain? Which saint's feast might bring rain or snow? The sound fills the air like a quilt. Someone jokes that the bread will taste better if you stare at it long enough. You grin. Then, I'm feasting already. The laughter that follows is weak but real. The oven glows red inside, and for a few moments, everyone looks less hungry. While you wait, you help repair the oven's door with a strip of wet cloth to seal the draft. It's one of those chores everyone pitches in for. The shared work feels almost festive, though no one calls it that aloud. This is what keeps the village from unraveling, these small, stubborn rituals of cooperation. When your loaf is done, you pull it out carefully. The crust is dark, the smell rich. You tap it lightly. It sounds hollow but alive. You wrap it in a bit of cloth, still warm against your chest. Outside, snowflakes drift lazily down, small as salt. Winter's handwriting. On the way home, you pass the threshing yard. A few men are beating what remains of the grain with flails, rhythmic thuds echoing into the cold air. The sound is almost hypnotic. You think about how many hands it takes to make a single meal. Farmers, millers, bakers, gleaners, even those who only pray for better weather. Every crumb is a collaboration. At home, you share the loaf. It's smaller than you'd like, but the crust cracks pleasantly, and the inside steams faintly. The flavor is earthy, faintly sweet, carrying the memory of fields and smoke. You dip it in warm broth and feel the edges of your hunger dull. That night, the community gathers for what they call a work night. You join others in spinning wool, mending nets, patching tools. It's not just labor, it's companionship disguised as productivity. Someone brings a fiddle missing 2 strings, another hums along, and soon there's laughter again. You tease the old miller that his singing could curdle milk, and he fires back. Good thing we've no milk left then. Your second joke lands with enough force to make the fire crackle in approval. As the night deepens, talk turns to the gleaning itself. Some say next year the Lord might forbid it if theft keeps rising. Others insist the church would never allow such cruelty. Historians still argue whether gleaning was charity or right. But around this fire, it's clear. It's both survival and salvation. When you finally crawl into bed, your body aches, but your mind hums with that quiet satisfaction that only shared work brings. You think of the women singing in the fields, the oven's warm glow, the laughter around the hearth. In famine, joy becomes a collective act, a rebellion whispered between neighbors. You close your eyes and imagine tomorrow's gleaning, the rhythm of bending and rising, the soft sound of straw brushing your sleeves. You picture a field that never runs out, a harvest that forgives. The thought settles over you like a blanket, thin maybe, but still enough to dream under. Morning light seeps through the shutters like pale soup, thin, tired, but still warm enough to start another day. You pull your cloak tight and listen to the village waking. A rooster's half-hearted crow, boots on frozen soil, the dull clang of someone chopping wood. The air smells of frost and smoke, the scent of people pretending the cold isn't winning. Today, you're watching the sky as much as the fields. When food runs out, faith and weather are what remain. The church bells ring for matins. You don't go. Your prayers are already in motion. Still, the sound rolls across the valley like a reminder. You're being watched, by heaven or by habit. The priest says hunger is a test. You'd rather call it a curriculum. You're learning what desperation can invent. You walk to the edge of the field, head tipped back, scanning the horizon. The clouds are a grayish bruise today. There's an art to reading them. Thick layers mean rain, thin streaks mean frost, and that strange greenish tint means trouble. You've become a meteorologist by necessity. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly predicted weather from the sky or simply guessed. You smile at that. Guessing's just science without paperwork. A neighbor trudges up beside you, muttering about omens. Ravens flew east this morning, she says. Means a thaw soon. You nod solemnly because people need to be believed when hope's that fragile. Then she adds, but the moon last night had a ring around it. Bad luck for the crops. You shrug. Maybe they'll cancel each other out. That earns a small laugh, the day's first warmth. By noon, the church doors are open. Inside, the air feels thick with candle smoke and whispered bargains with God. You slip in quietly, drawn more by habit than conviction. The walls glow amber from the flickering light. At the altar, the priest mutters Latin that no one fully understands, but the tone carries meaning: mercy, rain, forgiveness, though not necessarily in that order. You kneel, not to pray for plenty, but for endurance. You've stopped asking for miracles. Now you ask for manageable days. The saints on the wall seem to look down with weary sympathy, their painted eyes as hollow as yours. You wonder if any of them ever went hungry long enough to envy livestock. Probably not. After the service, the villagers gather outside. A procession forms, led by the priest holding a relic, a splinter of something holy wrapped in silk. You join in because it's what everyone does. Together, you walk the boundary of the village, chanting softly. For rain, for grain, for mercy, the priest calls. For all three, preferably at once, someone mutters under their breath. You smile. That's your first joke. Sacrilegious, but necessary. As you pass the fields, you sprinkle ashes from the church hearth. It's meant to cleanse the soil, to drive out the evil mists that choke growth. Historians still argue whether such rituals were symbolic or practical. Perhaps the ash even added minerals. Perhaps it just added comfort. Either way, belief tastes better than despair. The wind picks up sharp and wet. The procession quickens its pace. You can feel the hunger moving with the crowd, heavy but disciplined. Like an uninvited guest, everyone politely ignores. When it's over, you return home, half frozen but oddly lighter. Faith doesn't fill the belly, but it steadies the hands. At home, your mother's lit a small candle before an image of the Virgin, a scrap of painted wood gifted by a passing friar. She's placed a crust of bread before it, not as an offering, but as insurance. If anyone's watching, she says softly, they'll know we're trying. You nod. Faith, you've learned, is less about certainty and more about keeping up appearances for the universe. That evening, you gather with neighbors to share stories. The talk turns to weather omens again. One man swears he saw a halo around the sun and takes it as a sign of early spring. Another recalls the year the river froze so thick you could march an ox across it. Someone else says the cows are lying down more lately. Bad sign. You counter with, maybe they're just tired of standing for our nonsense. The laughter that follows feels like a small feast. Then an old woman, eyes sharp as thorns, speaks of the hungry fog, a pale mist that rolls through fields before a famine breaks. She claims it steals warmth from the soil. Historians still argue whether such folklore masked real knowledge of crop disease or was pure imagination. But in the candlelight, her words hush everyone. Even you find yourself glancing toward the window. The mist outside is harmless, probably. Probably. Later, as night falls, you step out to fetch more wood. The moon is high and ringed with light. A halo indeed, as the neighbor said. You tilt your head, trying to decide if it's omen or decoration. The stars burn cold and indifferent, but they make the world feel wider, which helps. You stand there until the cold begins to chew your fingers. Inside, you settle by the hearth. Someone's humming a hymn, off-key but sincere. You join softly, the Latin words half remembered, but the rhythm comforting. The song weaves through the room like thread, binding, fragile, necessary. As you drift toward sleep, your mind wanders to the idea of divine attention. You picture God not as a stern judge, but as a distracted farmer, looking down occasionally, muttering, "Oh, right, those people again." You smile at the thought, your second joke of the night, and feel a strange peace. The wind rattles the shutters once, then stills. The candle before the Virgin flickers low, casting the faintest glow across the room. For a heartbeat, everything feels balanced. The faith, the fear, the weather, the waiting. Tomorrow might bring frost or rain or nothing at all. But tonight, you've prayed, you've laughed, and you've kept the fire burning. That counts for something. You close your eyes, murmuring the same words you heard all day, half prayer, half wish. For rain, for grain, for mercy. And maybe, just maybe, the sky listens. The road is calling, though not kindly. You wake before dawn, staring at the faint outline of the rafters above you, listening to the restless wind pressing against the walls like a question you don't want to answer. The grain jar is nearly empty. The goat's milk has thinned to nothing. Even the rats seem to have given up on your floorboards. The decision that's been whispering for weeks finally speaks aloud in your head. It's time to move on. Leaving isn't unusual. It's a quiet migration repeated across every famine year. Peasants walk toward rumored charity like moths, toward candlelight, monasteries, market towns, cities said to be rich in scraps. The hope is rarely rewarded, but standing still feels worse. You pack lightly, a cloak, a wooden bowl, a crust of bread hard enough to qualify as weaponry, and a pouch with a few precious barley grains in case you find soil worth trusting again. The village is still asleep as you step out. The sky is a smear of gray, promising nothing. You glance once more at the cottage, smoke no longer rising, door tied with a rope that now looks more like a memory than a lock. You murmur to the walls, keep standing, and start walking. The first stretch is familiar. The field paths, the frozen stream crossing, the copse where you foraged nettles in better weeks. Then the world starts widening into the unknown. The air carries the faint, sour scent of other travelers, the invisible trail of thousands of feet, making the same reluctant pilgrimage. By midday, you join a small group headed the same direction. 2 men, a woman with a child strapped to her back, and an old pilgrim wearing a badge carved with a cross. The pilgrim greets you with a weary smile. You walk in for work or mercy? You shrug. Whichever's hiring. He laughs softly. Then we're all apprentices in the same trade. Together you follow the muddy road, passing milestones shaped like gravestones. The land looks bruised, fields untended, ditches overgrown. Every village you pass tells the same story. Fewer people, thinner faces, the smell of smoke from fires burning furniture instead of wood. Some places have hung bunches of herbs above doors to ward off sickness. Others simply bar the gates and pretend no one's inside. Historians still argue whether famine refugees were welcomed or feared as disease carriers. But walking here, you feel both truths flicker at once. By evening, you reach a crossroads marked by a wooden shrine. A candle burns inside, though no one's around to tend it. You share a scrap of bread with the others, dipping it into water to soften it. The woman hums to her sleeping child. The older man mutters prayers that sound like apologies. You add silence. It feels like the most honest contribution. As darkness settles, the pilgrim tells stories. He claims to have visited a monastery up north where no one goes hungry, where bread is baked daily and every traveler fed. You want to believe him. Historians still debate whether such monasteries were truly charitable or merely selective, feeding those who looked sufficiently pitiful. You look down at yourself, mud-smeared, hollow-eyed, and think you might qualify. That night, you sleep under a hedgerow, wrapped in your cloak. The stars are sharp enough to cut. The ground is so cold it feels like lying on an accusation. You wake often, half dreaming of kitchens, of warmth, of bread soft enough to tear without a knife. Once you dream you're walking through a field of golden wheat that whispers your name. When you reach to grab a handful, it turns to dust. You laugh in your sleep, the bitter kind of laugh that costs nothing but warmth. At dawn, frost has crusted the edges of your cloak. The group moves again, slow and stiff. The child on the woman's back whimpers softly, then quiets. You share your last crumb of bread with her. The pilgrim thanks you with a look that says he knows it's a larger gift than it appears. Midday brings you to another village, this one larger, ringed by a ditch and wooden palisade. The gatekeeper eyes you all warily. "Travelers bring sickness," he says. The pilgrim raises his badge and replies, "We bring prayers." The gatekeeper sighs, weighing superstition against decency, then waves you through. Inside, life feels marginally brighter. Smoke rises from chimneys, and you can smell stew from somewhere. You follow your noses to the churchyard, where a few monks are ladling broth for beggars. You queue up. The monk looks at you, then at your hands, your shoes, your face. He pours you half a bowl, thin, pale, but warm, and nods you onward. You murmur thanks, drink it greedily, and feel it spread through your chest like the memory of summer. Someone beside you jokes that the broth tastes of hope and disappointment, equal parts. You answer, better than disappointment alone. There's a faint ripple of laughter, your first in days. You stay in the village overnight, sleeping in a hayloft offered by the miller's wife. She says travelers often repay in stories, so you tell her about your village, about gleaning, nettle soup, and how you once joked that the pottage could thatch a roof. She laughs so hard she nearly drops the lantern. We'll try that next storm, she says. In the morning, you thank her and move on. The road forks ahead, north to the monastery, east to the sea. The pilgrim chooses north. You hesitate. The sea sounds tempting, salt air, new trades, maybe fish instead of roots. But you follow north too, because hope's direction is always slightly uphill. Days blur. The road becomes your routine. Walk, rest, share, listen. You learn to read people the way you once read weather, who might share a meal, who might share a lie. Some travelers vanish overnight, leaving only footprints and the echo of coughing. Others join briefly, adding their stories to the collective folklore of survival. You reach the monastery after a week, a walled compound of stone and silence. Smoke rises from its chimneys, promising bread. At the gate, a monk examines you, his gaze clinical but kind. Are you seeking shelter or penance? He asks. Whichever's cheaper, you reply. He almost smiles and opens the gate. Inside, it smells of baking. Warmth hits you like an embrace. You're given a bowl of stew thicker than anything you've eaten in months. You eat slowly, almost reverently. Around you, other travelers do the same, each face softening in the candlelight. You look at them and think, famine has many shapes. Some walk, some kneel, all survive. Later, as you lie on a straw pallet, full for the first time in memory, you whisper a private joke to the ceiling. Lord, if hunger was your test, I think I've passed with extra credit. The straw rustles as if agreeing. You smile, half asleep, the sound of distant bells drifting through the stone halls. For now, you've stopped moving. For now, that's enough. You wake in the monastery before dawn, to the smell of damp stone and barley porridge. The bells ring somewhere deep in the cloisters, slow and steady, each chime spreading through the halls like warm water poured over cold hands. You lie still for a moment, listening. It's a different rhythm from village life, measured, orderly, safe. The monks move like clockwork. Their hunger is spiritual, not physical, or so they say. When you sit up, the straw mattress sighs beneath you. Your stomach feels strange, full. It's a novelty so rare you half wonder if you've broken some cosmic rule. Breakfast is served in the refectory. Barley gruel, a hunk of coarse bread, and a sip of watered wine. You eat in silence because here, silence is law. Only the scrape of spoons and the soft shuffle of sandals echo through the room. After the meal, a monk gestures for you to follow him. He leads you through stone corridors lined with niches filled by saints who look perpetually unimpressed. Outside, the cold air bites, but it's clean, pure, and carries the faint sweetness of wood smoke. You're taken to the workshop yard where tools hang like promises. You can stay, the monk says softly, if you work. You nod. It's the best offer you've heard in months. Your first job is mending. The monastery has piles of things waiting to be saved: broken barrels, torn habits, leaky buckets. You sit among them like a doctor in a ward of quiet patients. You patch leather with sinew thread, fix handles with twine, sandwood until it forgets it was splintered. The smell of shavings and beeswax fills your nose. Crafting feels sacred here, not because of ritual, but because it replaces despair with focus. Each repaired object is a declaration. Not everything broken stays that way. You begin to remember what usefulness feels like. That, more than the food, nourishes you. By midday, your hands are blistered, but you don't mind. A young novice brings you a bowl of thin soup and bread, still warm from the oven. You thank him with a nod. He hesitates before leaving, whispering, "God bless your work." You smile, biting back the reply, "And may God give me better tools." Instead, you whisper, "And yours." In the afternoon, you help collect fuel. The monks have a system: nothing wasted, nothing burned too quickly. You follow a brother named Oswin into the forest behind the abbey, gathering fallen branches, dry leaves, and the occasional chunk of peat. "We mix dung with the peat," Oswin explains, cheerful as a man describing a feast. "Burns longer." You nod politely, thinking that longer isn't necessarily better smelling. He laughs when he sees your expression. "Aye, we all wrinkle our noses at first," he says. "Then winter teaches gratitude." Historians still argue whether medieval people truly burned animal dung for fuel, or only in the poorest regions. You'd like to inform them that, yes, you absolutely do. And you're grateful for it, even as you cough through the smoke. That night, your hands smell of ash and leather, your clothes of smoke. The monks chant Compline in the chapel, low melodic voices blending in stone echo. You don't know the words, but you hum along, feeling the sound vibrate in your chest. There's peace here, though it's a borrowed kind, the sort that lasts only as long as your usefulness. The next day, you're asked to help with candles. The wax is reused again and again, melted down, filtered through cloth, poured into wooden molds. The scent is honey sweet at first, then faintly burnt. As the candles cool, you trim the wicks and think how strange it is that something meant to burn must first be carefully shaped, not to waste itself too quickly. Maybe survival's the same. One of the monks, a thin man with kind eyes, tells you that candle wax sometimes doubles as medicine. "For chapped hands," he says, rubbing a little onto your cracked skin. "And for sore feet." He grins. "Pilgrims swear by it." You murmur, "We swear at it," which earns your first laugh of the day and his quiet, "Hush, or you'll be scrubbing pots till Easter." Days pass with the same rhythm: mending, gathering, crafting, praying. You start learning small tricks from the brothers: how to dry herbs on twine, how to stitch cloth so it doesn't unravel, how to carve small tools from scrap bone. Each task makes the world a little more manageable. You begin to see why monasteries survive famine better than villages. Discipline isn't just virtue, it's logistics. Outside, winter deepens. Snow piles on the cloister arches, soft and silent. The world beyond the wall seems to fade, replaced by the steady heartbeat of the abbey. But even within these stone walls, hunger lingers. Some monks eat less so the almonry, the charity kitchen, can feed more. You help ladle out soup one evening, handing bowls to travelers who look exactly like you did weeks ago. Their eyes flick up, hopeful, exhausted. You recognize yourself in every one of them. Later, as you scrub the empty pots, Brother Oswin sighs. There's never enough. You reply, there never was. He chuckles softly. True, but at least we make the lack behave. That night, you sit in the dormitory, watching candlelight flicker across the rough stone. The others sleep, their breath steady. You trace the small wax smear on your palm. It's hardened now, smooth as a memory. You think about the crafts you've learned, the warmth of the fires, the strange dignity of fixing rather than consuming. Historians still argue whether peasants who found refuge in monasteries ever returned to their villages or stayed behind these safer walls. You're undecided. Safety is seductive, but so is the road. Before you sleep, you whisper your nightly joke into the dark. If work is prayer, I've said enough rosaries to get a private room in heaven. A few monks stir, half asleep, smiling faintly. You smile too. Outside, snow keeps falling, soft as flower dust. The abbey bells toll for midnight prayer, and though you stay in bed, the sound wraps around you like warmth. Tomorrow will be another day of fixing, patching, and mending, inside and out. And if that isn't holiness, you think, it's close enough. By early spring, the snow begins to melt, and you can smell the thaw, the damp sweetness of earth waking under its blanket of rot. The monastery bells sound softer now, less like warnings and more like invitations. You've been here long enough that your hands have toughened, your face filled out again, and your stomach no longer growls like a trapped animal. Yet there's an itch beneath your ribs, a tug toward the world outside these stone walls. You can't quite call it wanderlust, more like obligation dressed as curiosity. Brother Oswin finds you staring at the gate one morning, your cloak already half-tied. Thinking of leaving? He asks, though it's not really a question. You nod. The fields back home need new seed, you say. He studies you for a long moment, then hands you a small bundle. Dried peas, a twist of salt, a stub of candle. Plant what survives, he says. You smile. That's the plan. The road south feels familiar now, though it's changed. Puddles fill the ruts. Birds return, noisy and shameless. The air smells of wet bark and faint decay. You walk steadily, the weight of your small pack surprisingly comforting. Along the way, you pass other travelers heading in the opposite direction. Some toward the abbey you've left, others toward rumors of work in the cities. Everyone moving, everyone half-fed, half-hopeful. It takes days to reach your old village, though you measure the distance less in miles and more in ghosts. The closer you get, the quieter the landscape grows. When you finally see the cluster of thatched roofs, your heart lifts and sinks at once. Smoke curls from a few chimneys. Life, fragile but stubborn. The rest stand empty, roofs sagging, doors unlatched. You find your own cottage still standing. The rope across the door is untouched. Inside, it smells of dust and memory. You light the stub of the candle Oswin gave you, its wax glowing softly. The flame makes the small space look almost whole again. There's still a patch of field behind the house, brown and bedraggled, but not dead. You kneel, press your palm to the soil. It's cold, gritty, but loosening. The thaw has begun. You dig your fingers in and whisper, "All right, let's try again." The peas go in first, one by one, a rhythm as ancient as any prayer. You mix in the few barley grains you carried, small and golden like hope itself. You cover them gently, patting the earth as though tucking in a child. Then you sit back on your heels, exhaling slowly. The world feels larger when you're part of it again. Over the next days, you reclaim routine. You mend the roof with reed and rope, sweep out the hearth, and rebuild the pen for whatever animals you might acquire again. Your hands remember these movements instinctively. Hunger might have stripped away comfort, but it never stole skill. A neighbor passes by, Marta, the woman who once traded you hay for herbs. She looks thinner, her hair streaked gray, but her eyes still have their quiet mischief. "Back from the monks, are you?" she calls. You grin. "Didn't like the hours." She laughs, the sound like dry wheat rustling. That evening she visits with a loaf of barley bread, dense but fragrant. "First of the new flour," she says proudly, "mixed with pea meal. Don't ask how much sweeping it took to gather enough." You both laugh. There's your first joke of the night, soft and friendly. You share the loaf, dipping it in thin ale, trading stories of who left, who stayed, and who didn't make it through. It's a short list, and a heavy one. The next day, you join others repairing the communal oven, its stones cracked under the winter frost. Everyone works together, singing a slow, steady tune to keep rhythm. The refrain is simple, something about bread, survival, and saints with good timing. Historians still argue whether such work songs were religious, social, or purely practical. To you, they're just oxygen made audible. When the oven is patched, you help light it, feeding in twigs, then kindling, then logs until the interior glows red. The warmth against your face feels almost like forgiveness. A child brings a lump of dough on a wooden board, his grin missing several teeth. "It's for St. Joseph's feast," he announces. You nod solemnly, as though this loaf personally represents the village's future. Maybe it does. The next weeks pass in a kind of gentle rhythm. The days stretch longer. The fields soften. You see green again, nettles pushing through the ditches, wild onions along the path, the first shy sprigs of herbs that survived winter's tantrum. Foraging feels easier now, less desperate. You pluck leaves just because they're there, not because you're starving. That small difference feels enormous. You begin mending tools again, trading small repairs for food. The blacksmith's apprentice brings you a cracked ladle. You patch it with wire and wax. "As good as new," you tell him. "Better," he replies, "since it survived." You both laugh. That's your second joke. One afternoon, you walk the boundary of the fields, studying the new growth. It's fragile, yes, but alive, tiny green blades pushing through soil that seemed lifeless only weeks ago. You crouch down, run your fingers through the shoots, and whisper, "You're braver than we are." At dusk, the villagers gather for the first communal meal since before the famine began. It's not lavish, pottage thickened with peas, bread crusts, and a splash of goat milk, but the air hums with something new. Not laughter exactly, but something close. The reeve even cracks a smile, muttering that next year's tithes might not be pure tragedy. Someone throws in, "Unless the rats tithe first." You raise your bowl and add, "Then let's pray they're generous." The laughter that follows is warm, unguarded. As night falls, you sit by your hearth again. The candle stub from the abbey burns low, its light trembling. You think of Brother Oswin, of the monks chanting in the cold stone chapel, of the quiet hum of the forest beyond the walls. You think, too, of all the hands in all the villages doing what you're doing now, rebuilding, replanting, relearning abundance. Historians will later debate whether peasants truly recovered from famine or simply endured until the next one. You suspect it's both. Survival isn't a finish line, it's a recurring appointment. But tonight, the air smells of turned soil and bread crusts, And that's enough proof that endurance can sometimes bloom into living. Before sleep, you whisper to the dark, "Maybe we'll call this year the good one." The wind sighs in agreement, or maybe it's just the roof settling into spring. You close your eyes and imagine green stretching to the horizon, the sound of bees returning, and a loaf baking slow and golden. If faith once lived in the church, it lives now in the fields. And for the first time in a long while, you let yourself believe that the earth, like you, has learned how to start over. The fields hum with quiet effort now, every furrow a heartbeat. You rise before dawn to tend the shoots that dared to live, boots sinking slightly into the soft, thawed earth. Your breath fogs in the chill, and the air smells sharp, like iron, damp hay, and the promise of growth. It's astonishing how much greener the world seems when your stomach isn't constantly folding in on itself. You run your palm over the young barley. The blades are cool and damp, their edges whispering against your skin. The memory of last year's famine still clings to you like a shadow, but this morning, the sunlight feels heavier than the past. You stand still for a moment, letting the warmth seep into your shoulders. You've begun to move differently, less like a ghost, more like someone belonging to the world again. The village is stirring too. Children chase chickens, laughter sharp as the morning light. The old woman with the elm bark soup has started selling herbal tonics again, this time made with real herbs. The blacksmith hums as he works, the rhythmic clang sounding almost like a hymn. The reeve even nods at you when he passes, which in his language counts as gratitude. At midday, you sit with Marta by the well, sharing bread and boiled peas. She sprinkles a pinch of salt, real salt, not ash, and grins. "Luxury dining," she says. You chuckle. "Don't tempt fate. The sky might raise the rent again." That's your first joke, and she snorts so loudly a passing chicken startles. In the afternoon, the villagers gather to discuss rebuilding the grain store. The old one, damp and rat-bitten, is finally beyond saving. Plans spread quickly, a raised floor of planks to keep the grain dry, clay lining on the walls, stronger shutters. You volunteer to carve the hinges. Your hands remember the rhythm of the work from the monastery. Crafting feels easier now, like singing a familiar song in a voice you'd almost lost. That evening, you and a few others head to the forest for timber. The trees smell of sap and old rain. You cut slow and careful, every strike deliberate. You talk as you work, not about hunger, but about next winter, about better ways to store and trade, about how you might avoid the next famine altogether. Historians will still argue about us, you joke, wiping your brow. Were we wise, or just lucky? A younger man grins. Let them argue, we'll be too busy eating to care. You carry the timber back on your shoulders, sweat mixing with the sweet resin smell. Back in the village, smoke rises from hearths, real meals cooking, not just experiments with bark and ash. You can tell by the smell that someone's making pottage thick enough to chew. The scent alone feels like a blessing. You stop at the bakehouse where a new batch of bread is cooling. The communal oven glows orange inside. You reach out, brushing your fingers against the crust of a cooling loaf. It's still warm, the surface cracking softly as it cools. You don't steal a bite. You just breathe it in. After all, patience has become your greatest harvest. Later that night, the villagers light a bonfire in the square, a rare thing now that there's wood to spare. The flames lick the dark, casting long shadows on smiling faces. Someone brings out a fiddle, missing 2 strings, but enthusiastic nonetheless. A few people dance, clumsy but joyful. boots thumping against the packed dirt. You sit near the fire, the heat painting your face. Marta joins you, a cup of weak ale in her hand. "We're getting bold," she says. "A fire big enough to be seen from the manor." You grin. "Good. Let them know we're still here." That's your second joke of the night, though there's steel behind it. The fire pops in agreement. The talk around the flames turns to stories again. The famine year, the wandering, the strange inventions that kept everyone alive. Someone swears they once ate boiled leather boots. Someone else claims the monastery up north made beer from turnips. You add your own. I met a man who swore by straw soup, said if you boiled it long enough, it tasted of hope. The laughter that follows is long and deep, not desperate anymore, but cleansing. You hadn't realized how much the village needed to laugh together again. As the stars come out, the reeve stands and raises his cup. "To the stubborn," he says simply. Everyone echoes it. "To the stubborn." You feel the words settle in your chest, warm as bread. When the fire finally burns low, you walk home through the quiet lanes. The night smells of smoke and spring, of soil breathing again. You pause by the small patch of field behind your cottage. The peas you planted have pushed higher, their tendrils curling like question marks in the moonlight. You crouch, touching the leaves gently. "You made it," you whisper. "Good job." Inside, your hearth burns steady. You set a small pot of water to boil just for the luxury of warmth. Steam curls upward, catching the firelight. You take a piece of barley bread, thick and brown, and tear it in half. The crust cracks audibly, the inside soft and fragrant. You eat slowly, chewing like someone who remembers what starvation taught, but refuses to live by it anymore. Historians will later write about recovery, charts, yields, trade routes, population rebounds. They'll note that famine eased this year, that normal conditions resumed. But there's nothing normal about what survival becomes. You carry famine in your muscles, in the way you measure portions, in the instinct to hide crumbs as though kindness itself might spoil. You lean back, staring at the flames. The room is small, patched, imperfect, but it's enough. You think of all the hands that helped rebuild, all the small mercies traded like currency, a neighbor's laugh, a monk's candle stub, a loaf shared in faith rather than fear. Your final joke drifts out with the smoke. "If next winter comes early, I'm telling it we're closed for renovations." You laugh softly at yourself, then settle beneath your blanket. Outside, the frogs begin their spring chorus, and the wind carries the scent of new things growing. You close your eyes, listening. The world hums again, still hungry in its own way, but alive, stubborn, forgiving, and so are you. Summer slips into the valley quietly, like an apology. The barley ripens pale gold, the peas hang heavy on their vines, and for the first time in a long while, you don't wake up immediately counting what's left. The morning smell of dew and wildflowers, of bread baking in shared ovens, of life daring to be normal again. You move through your days slower now, not from weakness, but from choice. You've learned that rushing never makes abundance last longer. You start each morning in the field, barefoot in the cool soil, running your hands through the heads of grain. The texture is soft, almost silken, whispering against your palms. You can feel the weight of each kernel. The difference between survival and starvation. Every stalk feels like a secret you managed to keep. By noon, the sun hangs high, the kind of heat that smells like hay and dust. You strip to your shirt and scythe along the rows with the others, the rhythm steady, swoosh, step, gather. Sweat darkens the fabric, and the sound of blades through grass blends with humming and soft laughter. You remember when this work used to be desperation, now it's deliverance. The reeve walks past, his ledger in hand, but even he smiles today. Good yield, he mutters. You grin. Tell that to the saints. They've done the hard part. That's your first joke. And he chuckles, scribbling notes that for once don't feel like doom. At dusk, the fields glow copper, and you all stop to rest. Someone brings out a jug of small ale, another a crust of cheese. And the meal becomes a quiet celebration. You eat under the open sky, the taste of salt and sweat mingling with barley bread and gratitude. Someone starts singing, a tune about harvest and second chances, and soon the field hums with voices. Later that night, you carry your share of grain back home, the sack heavy but precious. Inside, you pour a handful onto the table, running your fingers through it like treasure. The grains catch the firelight, gleaming. You think about that first night of famine when every kernel felt like a countdown. Tonight, it feels like currency for peace. You set some aside for seed, some for bread, and, because you can afford to now, a small bowl just for a decoration, a reminder of what survived. The irony makes you laugh softly. We used to hide it, you whisper. Now we show it off like jewelry. That evening, Marta visits with her youngest son. He's carrying a garland of wheat stalks, uneven but proud. He wanted to make a crown for the harvest feast, she says. The boy holds it out to you solemnly. You helped grow this. You kneel, take it gently, and place it on his head instead. No, you say, smiling. You did. He beams, and for a heartbeat, the room feels brighter than the fire. When the feast arrives a week later, the whole village gathers on the green. Tables appear, planks balanced on barrels, and everyone brings something: loaves, roots, dried peas, even a jug of honeyed ale from someone's cousin 3 villages over. The smell of roasting grain and herbs fills the air. It's not a banquet, but compared to last year's empty nights, it might as well be heaven. The priest blesses the food, voice trembling with emotion. We remember those who couldn't be here, he says. Heads bow. The silence that follows isn't mournful, it's reverent, like everyone agreeing that memory itself deserves to eat. Then the reeve clears his throat and raises his cup. To the living, he says, and the cheer that erupts feels like a dam breaking. You eat until your stomach protests, laughing between mouthfuls. Someone starts dancing, a clumsy circle that grows as more join. You find yourself swept along, feet thudding against packed earth, hands clasping strangers' hands. The air rings with music, clapping, the hiss of torches in the breeze. Historians will argue one day whether post-famine festivals were acts of gratitude or denial. Standing here, you know the answer. They're both, and that's what makes them beautiful. When the moon climbs high, you step away for a moment, wandering toward the edge of the fields. Fireflies blink along the ditches, tiny floating embers. You sit on the low stone wall and watch the barley sway, each stalk shimmering in the moonlight like liquid gold. The wind sighs through it, sounding almost like breath, slow, content, alive. You think back to everything you've done to stay alive, counting grain, boiling bark, foraging swamp roots, milking a half-starved goat, walking roads lined with ghosts. Every absurd recipe, every whispered prayer, every joke told to stop the silence from swallowing you. All of it leads here to this quiet fullness. You chuckle softly, your second joke for the night. Turns out, survival's the longest recipe I've ever followed. The barley rustles approvingly. You lie back, arms behind your head, eyes on the stars. They look less like cold witnesses now, more like distant campfires, reminders that other people somewhere are also full and breathing. The hunger doesn't vanish. You'll always carry its echo, but it no longer rules you. The feast winds down. The laughter fades into soft murmurs and sleepy good nights. You rise, stretch, and start the walk home. The path glows faintly with moonlight, each step easy, unhurried. Inside your cottage, the fire burns low, the same hearth that once held your weakest nights. You add a log, sit down, and let the warmth wash over you. The air is thick with the smell of baked bread and wood smoke. You breathe it in deeply, then exhale slow. Outside, the wind settles, gentle as a sigh. The candle flickers, you close your eyes. And now, time slows, voice softens, heartbeat eases. The story drifts into its wind down. The room fades into gold and shadow. You feel the weight of your own breathing, steady, quiet. The famine, the hunger, the fear, they shrink until they're only background hums, distant thunder from another lifetime. What remains is warmth, the steady crackle of the hearth, the faint rustle of grain outside, the rhythm of life relearning its peace. You picture the fields blanketed in night, every blade of barley bending gently, whispering your name back to the wind. You imagine the air cooling, the stars leaning closer, and the old world finally unclenching its fists. The village sleeps, safe, fed, dreaming. Somewhere a dog sighs, a door creaks, the earth breathes, your body relaxes, limbs heavy, mind drifting like smoke over the valley. You let the quiet in. You let it fill every space the hunger once claimed. And as your heartbeat matches the slow, patient rhythm of the fields, you know, survival isn't just continuing. It's learning how to rest.